Haven't you always wondered how people manage to make it to that list of world records? Let's look at some of the most outrageous record breakers out there, shall we? From the longest wedding dress train to the tallest man and the woman with the longest fingernails to even the man holding the record for the most records. Let's explore these awesome stories together. The world record for hosting the largest barbecue doesn't belong to a person, but to a whole city. I mean, it does really take some power to grill all that food. So the small city of Minas in Uruguay came together in 2017 to smash this one. About 200 people cooked over 36,000 pounds of food. And they were doing it for a total of 14 hours. Why would they even start such a project, you might ask? Well, because of the magical spirit of competition, of course. They wanted to snatch the world record back from Argentina, which had previously surpassed them back in 2011. The party in Uruguay didn't end up producing the biggest burger, though. That's a whole other story. The record now belongs to the people at Mally's Sports Bar and Grill, located in the Detroit suburb of Southgate. How did they manage to break this one? Simple, they produced the Godzilla of burgers, weighing about 1,800 pounds. That's about the size of an American bison. It did take some kind of investment on their part, since they had to custom make an oven large enough to fit the burger in the first place. Obviously, they couldn't find one of those available on the market, so they fashioned one out of a shipping container. Never thought this one would be a record to break, but turns out there's a record for the largest gathering of people to eat breakfast in bed. I sure would have wanted to participate in this one. But unfortunately for me, I wasn't one of the 418 people that ended up participating. They broke the record at the Sheraton Lanfan Chabai River Hotel on August 16, 2015. A lot of young ones also ate their breakfast in bed with their parents, but they didn't make the official count. So if you think about it, the number was actually higher. And speaking of world records that brought people together, according to the official Guinness records, the one for the most people doing fist bumps simultaneously was achieved by Sciatook Public Schools in Sciatook, Oklahoma, USA. This was back in November 5, 2015, and the total number of people that participated was an impressive 1,820. One of my favorites is the story of Alvin Kelly, a world champion flagpole sitter from the 1920s. His nickname was Shipwreck Kelly. But why was that? Well, because he claimed to be a survivor of the Titanic. He worked in shipyards as a steeplejack and a stuntman before starting his flagpole sitting endeavor. His Titanic story proved to be far from the truth, but Kelly did have a lot of close calls throughout his whole life, having survived 5 shipwrecks, 2 plane crashes, 3 car accidents, and 1 train derailment. Or at least, that's what he said. Back to the flagpole thing. Alvin Kelly would climb on top of a specially designed flagpole and would sit there on a small platform for days or even weeks. Okay, he might have enjoyed it, but he was paid for it too. He became a sort of a weird celebrity at the time and even charged as much as $100 to $500, roughly $1,500 to $8,300 in today's money, for every hour he had to stay perched on a pole. He broke the world record when he sat on a flagpole for a total of 1,177 hours, which is 49 days plus an hour. He learned to take naps while sitting upright and was often photographed doing random things while up there, like reading the newspaper or shaving. They say he had spent a staggering 20,613 hours flagpole sitting over the course of his lifetime. Caudry, a French town famous for its production of lace, snatched the title for the world's longest wedding dress train. They produced a spectacular white gown that featured a super long train. That's almost long enough to cover Mount Everest, which is 5.5 miles. They did need the help of 15 volunteers to finish the project. The team also spent 2 months initially stitching individual pieces of the train, and afterward, they sewed them together. There's also a world record for the longest fingernails. At some point, it belonged to Ayanna Williams from the US, whose astonishing nails had a combined length of over 24 feet when measured back in March 2021. She started growing her nails in 1993, and the record was confirmed in 2017. Ayanna lost her record in 2021 as she was no longer comfortable with doing day-to-day tasks, like making her bed or putting on her shoes. To remove those incredible nails, she had to seek an appointment with the professional who used a special device to cut them. It's easy to imagine why a simple pair of clippers just wouldn't have done the job, right? The first ever recorded tallest person in the world is known as Robert Wadlow, who was born on February 22, 1918, and had regular-sized parents, surprisingly. He was also pretty average at the time of his birth, weighing just 8.7 pounds, but things rapidly took off, and he reached 5'4" by the age of 5 and was 5'11" by the time he was 8. At 17, he became the tallest teenager ever, surpassing the 8-foot mark. When they last measured his height on June 27, 1940, Robert stretched a mind-boggling 8 feet 11 inches in height. Due to a condition that meant he had abnormally high levels of human growth hormone, he continued to grow throughout his life. Even though he was a celebrity in his own right, life wasn't always easy for Robert, given his size. He had to consume about 8,000 calories a day and needed leg braces and a walking stick to move around. He never used a wheelchair though. His legacy stretches across many life-size statues of him all over the world, even a song telling his story. If breaking world records is something you aspire to do, you might have a thing or two to learn from Ashrita Furman. He is known to have set more than 600 to the day and currently holds over 200. Ashrita began his journey of becoming a multiple title holder in the early 1960s. He had a complete fascination with the annual Guinness World Record book. He accomplished his first record by doing the most consecutive jumping jacks. It took him a total of 6 hours, 45 minutes, and 27,000 jumping jacks to complete this one. Ever since, he's gathered multiple records in his unusual portfolio, such as the one for the farthest distance trekked balancing a bike on his chin, for the most fire torches lit and extinguished in 1 minute, and the one for the fastest mile on a pogo stick. He's even added one for the longest time to hula hoop underwater and for the most arrows broken with his neck in 1 minute. To top it all off, he even tackled the greatest distance traveled on a bicycle, balancing a milk bottle on his head. And that's just to name a few. Ashrita is also one of the very few individuals in the world known to have broken a record on every single continent on the planet. He's also part of the executive club of holders of more than 100 records at any given time. He may have dialed down a bit in recent years, but he doesn't plan on stopping anytime soon. Currently living in Queens, New York, Ashrita has even been the subject of a documentary of his own, showcasing the major moments of his amazing record-setting career.
A lot of weird incidents have happened in the mysterious valley of Hazu ever since the 1950s. People even started comparing it to the infamous Bermuda Triangle. But are they really that similar? It all started when an airplane went missing here under circumstances no one can explain yet. They searched the location back and forth, but nothing appeared to have remained of the aircraft. And guess what? No one received any SOS messages from the team on board. And to top it off, the same year, a considerable number of tourists and local residents were lost here in the valley, never to be seen again. Speaking of the Bermuda Triangle, one can link its origin story to a series of mysterious disappearances of ships and aircraft, like the one that happened in 1945, when 5 planes and 14 people on board went missing in this location while doing routine training exercises. Even a thorough investigation didn't help to establish the cause of the incident. But that wasn't the end. Between 1945 and the mid-1980s, another 25 small planes went missing while going through the Bermuda Triangle, never to be seen again. And the search parties haven't recovered a single piece of these aircraft. The Bermuda Triangle isn't the only stretch of water that has claimed ships for good. In the Pacific Ocean, near Japan, there's a tricky portion of water that has earned the nickname the Devil's Sea. The best known out of all of these disappearances is that of a fishery patrol vessel that went missing in 1953. On board were 31 crew members and scientists who were looking to investigate a recently formed volcanic island. What happened to the ship and all the people on board? We'll never know, I guess, since they never found the ship or the crew members, and there was literally no trace of them left behind. Back in 1911, a standard train was scheduled to depart from a railway station in Rome, hoping to reach the city of Milan. Needless to say, none of the 106 passengers ever made it to the destination. and no one has ever seen them again. What happened to these people and to their train? Were they really lost forever? Some people seem to believe this isn't the case. As it was completing its journey, the train was supposed to pass through a long tunnel. It did enter it, but never came out the other end of the tunnel. Nothing was left of the train, and it seemed like it literally just vanished into thin air. Only 2 of the passengers were found, but they were quite unwell at the time, and their stories did not seem to make much sense. They spoke of a dense fog that they simply jumped out of because they got so scared. 15 years later, a story spread about a group of 104 Italian people that popped up in Mexico City, claiming they had arrived by train from Rome. If that's not weird enough, the story appears to have been reported back in 1845, 66 years before the train even departed in the first place. Of course, nobody at the time actually took these people seriously, but you can't help but wonder, did they actually time travel via the Roman tunnel, or is it just another urban myth? What do you think? The Lost Colony is the story of a strange phenomenon that happened back in the late 1500s. A group of people from England had moved into a colony on Roanoke Island off the coast of present-day North Carolina. But they soon realized they didn't have enough supplies. To fix this, the colony's governor decided to head back to England to get some. He didn't manage to come back for another 3 years. When he finally did, he was astonished at what was left behind. Nothing. The entire population of the colony was gone. The only reminder of what had been there was a single word carved into a tree. To this day, nobody knows what might have happened to these people or what the carved word means. A lighthouse without an operator? You might think that can't possibly be true, but hear me out. Located in the northwestern part of Scotland are the Flannan Isles. There's nothing fancy about them since they're nothing more than a bunch of rocks and grass. But there is a famous lighthouse here hiding a dark secret. In 1900, all 3 of the lighthouse's keepers mysteriously disappeared, never to be seen again. Ever since, the islands have been completely abandoned. The lighthouse became one of those with an automated system in the 1970s. No list of places where things go missing could be complete without this mysterious forest located in Transylvania, a region in Romania. And no, it has nothing to do with the famous Count Dracula, if that's what you're thinking. It's called the Hoya Forest, and it's a place that has seen quite its share of unusual phenomena. Not only do people go missing here, but others have experienced all sorts of weird noises, from female voices to whispers. Some people claim to have time traveled between the spooky trees of the Hoya Forest. They say they had literally skipped a few hours before they went back. The Yellowhead Highway is a stretch of road located in British Columbia, Canada. One section of the road has received a lot of attention throughout the years, starting with the 1960s because of some mysterious disappearances. These events have earned it the nickname Highway of Tears. There is no reasonable explanation as to why people keep going missing here. What is more striking is that most of these people were young women. This triangular area that stretches above the desert and the Sierra Nevada mountains in the state of Nevada received quite a bit of attention because of a disappearance that happened back in 2007. A record-setting sailor, aviator, and adventurer named Steve Fawcett flew here in a small plane and then disappeared. They searched for Fawcett intensively for months, but didn't find any traces of him or the aircraft. 1 year later, the mystery of Fawcett's fate was finally solved when a hiker came across his ID cards, and later a search party found the plane's wreckage. It's one of the most visited natural resorts in the world, but Yosemite National Park carries some dark secrets of its own. Despite its beauty and abundance of wildlife, a total of 45 people went missing right here in this location. No one knows what happened to them. Hey, maybe we should ask the local bears. They might know something. There are even stories of people that disappeared from one region of the park only to pop up in a completely different location. This hasn't stopped over 3 million people that visit the park each year from wandering around this location, though. Whenever a ship happens to sink, you'd expect to at least find pieces of it on the bottom of the sea, right? Well, not if you're traveling through Lake Superior. It's located along the border of the United States and Canada, and became famous because of the great number of ships that went missing here. It may have something to do with the stormy winds, of course, but that doesn't explain why some ships simply vanish altogether, without a single piece of them ever to be found, not even at the bottom of the lake. It does gather a lot of tourists each year, though. They come here to scuba dive and see the remains of some of the ships that still lie here. The bottom of this lake even contains what's left of the notorious SS Edmund Fitzgerald. Back when it departed on June 7, 1958, it was the largest ship on North America's Great Lakes and, to this day, remains the largest ship ever to have sunk in the area. Similar to other events, the exact cause of the shipwreck remains a mystery.
Once every couple of months you have bouts of hiccuping that last 10 to 20 minutes, and you think that it's horrible? Oh, my sweet summer child. Imagine hiccuping for 68 years straight. How would you like this? A man named Charles Osborne had quite a funny way of talking that he developed to hide the sound of his endless hiccups. Poor guy had been hiccuping non-stop starting from June 13, 1922, for over 68 years. So here's the story. Osborne was born back in 1893, and he started hiccuping after a small accident on a farm in Nebraska. He fell over, but he didn't feel anything weird until he started hiccuping like crazy. Doctors think that the accident might have damaged a small part of his brain that helped stop the hiccup reflex. There are a few different theories about what might have caused his hiccups. Some people think that he might have hurt his ribs during the fall, and that messed with his diaphragm muscle. Others think that he hit his head and had a stroke. Either way, he was stuck with the hiccups for all his remaining life. Can you imagine having 20 to 40 involuntary diaphragm spasms per minute for that long? By the time Osborne finally stopped hiccuping, he had probably done it about 430 million times in total during all his 97-year-long life. It was so bad that he saw a number of doctors, sometimes traveling quite far, but nobody could fix it. One doctor even tried to help him by putting him on a mix of carbon monoxide and oxygen, and it helped for a bit, but that ended up being a bad idea, since breathing in the poison gas wasn't a safe solution. Instead, Osborne had to learn a special breathing technique to minimize the hic sound that came with each spasm. He'd breathe in between hiccups and flex his chest a few times per minute to suppress the noise. It was still obvious that he was hiccuping since he'd heave and jerk, but at least it wasn't as loud. Osborne had been hiccuping for 56 years when he became famous by giving an interview in 1978. He said that he'd do anything to get rid of the hiccups, and that he didn't even know what it would be like to not have them. He was constantly sore from all the jerking and spasming. After speaking up, he got a lot of attention in the media. He was even listed in the Guinness World Records and appeared on TV shows like The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, and that's incredible. People from all over the country sent him letters with suggestions for how to cure the hiccups, but none of them worked for more than a little while. But this ordeal didn't stop Charles Osborne from living a relatively normal life. People knew him as a happy-go-lucky guy who loved cracking jokes and didn't talk much about his condition. He married twice and had 8 children. He sold farm machinery and auctioned off livestock for living. In 1990, for reasons that are still a mystery, Osborne's hiccups suddenly stopped after over 6 decades. Unfortunately, he passed away just a year later. I bet, however, that his last months were really happy because they were finally hiccup-free. Despite all the medical advancements made since Osborne's time, there is still no surefire way to cure prolonged hiccuping. Hiccups are a strange phenomenon that have been around since the dawn of mammalian existence. We still don't fully understand why they happen or what purpose they serve. Researchers are slowly uncovering the answers to 2 key questions. Why do hiccups occur in the first place, and how can we stop them? Hiccups are a reflex action, similar to the way your leg jerks when a doctor taps your knee with a hammer. This reflex is found in many mammals, from household pets like dogs and cats to larger animals like horses and rabbits. When you hiccup, a nerve signal travels from your diaphragm, which is the muscle located at the bottom of your lungs, to your brain and back again. This process is repeated multiple times, causing your diaphragm to contract and your lungs to expand. However, in the middle of the inhale, a reflex causes your epiglottis, which is a flap of tissue that sits at the top of your throat, to suddenly snap shut, creating the characteristic hic sound. This is how the sudden closure of vocal cords sounds. This cycle continues until the reflex is interrupted by something like holding your breath or drinking water. Hiccuping is caused by the phrenic nerve, which is a long and oddly shaped cord that goes from the chest to the diaphragm. It first appeared in mammals' ancestors that were fish-like, but theirs was shorter and connected straight to the gills next to the brain instead of going all the way to the diaphragm. The reflex of hiccups might have been useful for amphibians that lived on land, as they needed to switch between breathing underwater with gills and breathing in the air with lungs. The epiglottis flap closed and thus sent water into their mouth and gills, keeping it from going to lungs. However, since humans no longer live underwater and do not have gills, why do hiccups still exist in us? They may have other benefits. For example, babies tend to hiccup more often than adults, especially while suckling milk. As they drink, they also swallow air, and the hiccups might be the body's way of clearing the air from the stomach. This reflex might work like a self-initiated burp. Interestingly, it's not just young infants who hiccup a lot. Even fetuses as young as 10 weeks old have been observed hiccuping. This process might serve to train fetuses' brains to map out their internal body. In other words, they need to learn where their diaphragm is located and how to control their breathing, and hiccups might help them practice breathing so they're ready when they're born. Approximately 4,000 people seek medical attention for hiccups each year in the United States. How to get rid of hiccups is one of the most commonly searched health questions on Google. Most hiccups resolve by themselves within 2 days, but longer-lasting bouts could indicate an underlying problem such as a brain tumor. Sometimes patients face continuous hiccups that don't go away even after medical treatment, known as intractable hiccups. In such cases, only treatment of the underlying condition helps. To address hiccups, doctors have tried different medications that aim to relax muscles and nerves that may cause diaphragm spasms, but there isn't enough clear evidence to recommend a specific treatment. There's a Japanese research group that has discovered a new method of curing hiccups, and it involves breathing in high-concentration CO2. It tricks the brain into thinking there's a life-threatening emergency, causing it to forget about the hiccups. However, if you can't travel to Japan for this treatment, you can try some old wives' tales that have been proven to work, like drinking a whole glass of water in one gulp, standing on your head, or getting really scared. These methods work by interrupting the reflex arc, so the nerves and muscles are distracted by something else. This is a conclusion made by Ali Sifi, a neurointensivist who became obsessed with finding a cure after seeing a patient wake up with unexplainable hiccups after brain surgery. Drinking water quickly, for instance, forces the diaphragm to keep creating suction, which keeps the phrenic nerve occupied. It interrupts one part of the reflex. Similarly, getting scared, for example, activates the vagus nerve, which has a calming effect, thereby interrupting the other part of the reflex. Ali Saif has created a tool called the Hickaway, which is more consistent than the traditional methods because it helps to combine both effects. It looks like a straw that requires the drinker to suck very hard, like drinking a thick milkshake, engaging both nerves and effectively ending the hiccups.
Hey, want to hear something shocking? In an ordinary house outlet that we use to charge the phone, the voltage is 110 volts. A high-voltage power line that provides electricity to dozens of buildings has a voltage of 100,000 volts. The energy of one lightning strike is more than 10 million volts. Woo! And the temperature of lightning is almost twice the temperature on the sun's surface. And this incredible charge is flying at a speed of just 2.5 times slower than the speed of light. Now imagine what happens to a person when lightning strikes them. Well, let me tell you, the discharge passes through the body in 1/100th of a second. Lightning can stop our hearts and disrupt the work of our entire nervous system. You may not even realize what has happened at first. Perhaps you will lose consciousness and your body will be in a state of shock. Every day, there are several million lightning strikes in the world. Fortunately, you have little chance of getting hit by one. The odds that lightning will strike you is about 15,300 to 1. About 20,000 people are struck by lightning every year. the chances that lightning will strike you twice are even smaller. And what are the odds that you'll be struck by lightning 7 times throughout your life? It seems impossible, but one person experienced it for himself. His name was Roy Sullivan. He was born in 1912 in Greene County, Virginia, in a big family with 7 children. Roy was an ordinary guy and was no different from his brothers and sisters. But for some reason, the natural element chose him. In 1936, he began working as a ranger at Shenandoah National Park. There, lightning struck him 7 times over 35 years. So, the first accident happened in April 1942. On that day, a strong thunderstorm began. Roy took refuge in a new fire tower where builders hadn't installed a lightning rod. Lightning struck the building several times. A massive fire started inside and Roy ran out. As soon as he was a few feet away from the shelter, lightning hit his toe and burned a hole in his shoe. The next time occurred 27 years later, in July 1969. Roy was working in the national park. He was driving a truck through hilly terrain when a storm started. Lightning struck him through the open car window. The charge burned his eyebrows and eyelashes and slightly touched his hair. Roy lost consciousness and the car continued to move. It stopped at the very edge of a cliff. 15 minutes later, Roy came to his senses. A year later, in July 1970, the third time occurred. The weather was fine, but in a matter of minutes, clouds became thicker and a thunderstorm began. Lightning struck a transformer near Roy. The man ran away as fast as possible, but nature got him again. Lightning hit his shoulder. 2 years later, in 1972, lightning struck Roy for the 4th time while he was working at the National Park Station. The charge set his hair on fire, and the man ran to the bathroom and used a wet towel to put out the flames on his burning head. From that moment, Roy began to suspect that some invisible evil force had been pursuing him. He started to carry a bottle of water with him to put out the fire in case of another hit. The 5th strike happened in the national park again. It occurred in 1973. Roy tripped over a rock and fell. At that moment, he noticed thunderclouds in the sky. Frightened, he ran to his truck, got inside, and stepped on the gas. Roy drove as far from that spot as possible. Then he stopped and got out of the car to see where the storm was. And at that moment, lightning struck again. It went through his left arm and left leg and set his shoe on fire. Roy quickly climbed back into the truck and extinguished the fire using his water bottle. In 1976, the 6th case occurred. Roy was walking along a trail in the park, just 1 mile away from the place where lightning struck him the last time. And then storm clouds appeared again. Lightning flashed and stung Roy in the palm. After the 6th strike, he began to suspect something was wrong with the park. After 40 years of working, Roy finally decided to quit. Finally. He hoped the lightning would stop chasing him, but he was wrong. By that time, the man had already become a celebrity. But such fame didn't let him enjoy life. People were afraid to be near him because they believed the lightning could hit them at any moment. Journalists gave Roy Sullivan the nicknames Spark Ranger and Human Lightning Conductor. Of course, the man disliked all of this and felt very lonely. But besides this problem, he also suffered from constant fears and the feeling of persecution. All the time, he was waiting for the lightning to strike again at any moment. Fortunately, he was married. His wife supported him and helped him in everything. After quitting his job, Roy decided to move with his wife to the small town of Dooms, Virginia. Wow, Dooms. Talk about foreshadowing. It was only a year without accidents. Then, on June 25, 1977, lightning struck Roy again. He went fishing at the local pond early in the morning. The catch was good, but the sky was overcast. Roy immediately felt there would be a strike. There was a smell of sulfur in the air, and the hairs on his arms stood on end. His whole body tensed. Lightning struck Roy in the head, passing through his chest and stomach. The man ran to his car to take cover. At that moment, a hungry bear came out of the forest. He approached Roy's bucket of fish to pick up all the trout the man had caught. Roy ran out of the vehicle with his hair on his head smoldering to chase the animal away. After the seventh lightning strike, he lost hearing in his left ear and realized he couldn't hide from the lightning anywhere. His wife was afraid to be with him outside during a thunderstorm. One day, she was hanging laundry in the backyard. Roy came out of the house to help her. A few minutes later, lightning struck his wife. Fortunately, she wasn't badly injured. After that, besides fear and social loneliness, he felt guilt. Of course, many doctors and scientists tried to help Roy, but no one managed to find the reason for this strange phenomenon. According to science, each time it was just a coincidence. Mathematics and physics were powerless here. With such answers from scientists, Roy believed that invisible forces were pursuing him or that fate was punishing him for something. Perhaps the answer lies in the man's past. The National Park Service and doctors documented all 7 times when he was struck by lightning. But there was another 8th time, which couldn't be confirmed. According to Roy, lightning struck him in his youth when he was helping his father mow wheat. The discharge hit the scythe blade. No one but the boy saw it. Perhaps at that moment, the lightning changed something in his body and made him more attractive for the next hits. Lightning always chooses the path of least resistance. And this is how lightning occurs. Rain, ice, and snow particles collide with one another inside a storm. This process increases the imbalance between clouds and the ground, negatively charging the lower layers of clouds. Things down there, like trees and the earth, get positively charged and create another imbalance. Nature tries to remedy this imbalance between the two opposite charges by passing an electric current through them. Perhaps nature felt some charge imbalance in Roy's body and tried to remedy it. But why did he get struck at an interval of 1 to 2 years? Besides, more than 20 years passed between the first and second hit. Scientists still can't explain what happened to him. Maybe Roy was just an attractive guy. As you can probably predict, Roy Sullivan was listed in the Guinness Book of Records as the person struck by lightning most often in the world.
The theory of parallel worlds has been discussed in the scientific community for a very long time. Unfortunately, we're not developed enough yet to prove or disprove it. But it's still an interesting theory, and that's why we have a lot of unusual urban legends about the guests from a parallel reality, according to many. Let's check out a few of them. A man from a non-existent country. This story took place in 1851 in a small German village, Frankfurt an der Oder. A lost man came out to the local villagers asking for help. The man introduced himself as Jopar Voren. He spoke very poor German and had a very strong accent. The man himself claimed that he speaks Laxar and Abram, languages that don't actually exist on our Earth. He claimed to be from Laxaria, a country on the mainland called Sacria, separated from Europe by a huge ocean. However, none of these places existed on the Earth's map. People sent Jopar to the local authorities. He talked to a psychiatrist, but the doctor concluded that the man was totally sane. An investigation by the local police also revealed nothing suspicious about him. Jopar Voren claimed that the purpose of his visit to Europe was to find his long-lost brother. He survived a shipwreck and found himself near the village. They showed him a map of the world and a globe and asked him to indicate the place where he crashed, but he didn't recognize anything familiar. He seemed to have extensive knowledge about his homeworld. Jopar named 5 main continents on it: Sacria, Aflar, Astar, Auslar, and Uplar. His story was considered plausible. Scientists from Frankfurt decided to send the man to Berlin for further research. However, during the trip, he had something like a seizure. The man suddenly jumped out of the carriage and disappeared into the surrounding forest. Despite a long and thorough search, No traces of Yopar were found. He seemed to have disappeared as mysteriously as he had appeared. Inspector LeBouf, who was assigned to escort him to Berlin, thought this man could be a being from another world, and that he had returned from where he had come from. Lady on Highway 167. This incident happened on October 20th, 1969. It was first reported in 1988 in the magazine Strange. The article tells about two men, LC and his business partner, Charlie. The names are fictitious. One afternoon, LC and Charlie were driving along Highway 167 in southwest Louisiana. Discussing work, they drove toward the oil center of Lafayette. The highway was empty at first, but then the men noticed a very old and very slow car ahead. The men started discussing this mysterious car. Such cars hadn't been produced for several decades, but this one looked quite new. The men thought it was thanks to the owner's care and admired it. They slowed down to get a better look at the car. LC noticed a bright orange sign on it that said 1940. They saw a driver. It was a young woman in old-fashioned clothes, a hat with a long feather and a fur coat, even though it was warm outside. There was a child next to her, also dressed in a warm coat and a hat. LC and Charlie wanted to talk to her, but then they noticed the expression on her face. The woman was looking around in panic, almost on the verge of crying. LC called out to her and asked if she needed help. She nodded, and he gestured for her to park on the side of the road. But when the men also parked, they suddenly noticed that the woman's car had disappeared. They looked around the highway in shock. She couldn't have gone somewhere far so fast, but the car was nowhere to be found. After some time, another man drove up to LC and Charlie. He saw everything that happened and claimed that the car had simply disappeared. The men talked about the incident for several hours. When they reached the city, they contacted the police. However, the police couldn't help them in any way. Apart from their words, there was no confirmation of the existence of the car. The case was discussed for a while in local newspapers, and then was forgotten. The Gadianton Canyon Incident. This incident occurred in May of 1972 in southeastern Utah near the Modena Railroad crossing on the edge of the Escalante Desert. Jenna North was driving her father's 1971 Chevrolet Nova. Her friend, Carol Abbott, was in the passenger seat. In the back seat, there were two other girls, Lisa Rockford and Bethany Gordon. It was after 10 p.m. when the girls crossed the Utah-Nevada state line. They wanted to get back to campus before their housekeeper, Mrs. Mortensen, locked the dorm doors. This stretch of Highway 56 in Utah is pretty deserted. There's nothing there but sand and a few plants. The girls were very happy when they finally noticed the Union Pacific Railroad crossing in Modena. But right behind the railing, Jenna noticed two highways. One went into the desert, and the other to Gadianton Canyon. The girls decided to take the road to the canyon. They thought it would be a shortcut to campus. The other girls were chatting with each other when Jenna noticed that they were no longer driving on asphalt, but on white cement. "Watch out!" suddenly shouted one of the girls. The road ended abruptly at a high rock wall. It was a dead end. They had to go back the same way they came here. And while Jenna's friends were complaining that now they would have to sleep in the car, Jenna saw that the landscape had changed dramatically. They weren't in the desert anymore. Instead, the canyon turned into an open area with wheat fields, pine thickets, and a small lake ahead. A full moon was shining in the sky, which was strange because it shouldn't have been there that night. The girls had no idea where they were, so they just drove to the light ahead. It was some building that they thought was a diner or restaurant. The girls saw a bright neon sign, but none of them could read what was written on it. These symbols were unlike any language they knew. Suddenly, several people came out of the building. They seemed shocked and frightened by Jenna's Chevrolet. They waved their hands and shouted something, but the girls didn't understand them. Lisa decided to ask the men for directions. She stuck her head out of the window and immediately let out a terrifying scream. "Get out of here!" she shouted to Jenna. The Chevrolet sped away from the building. Bright headlights illuminated their car from behind. They were being chased by a few vehicles. These vehicles were egg-shaped, had 3 wheels, and made a buzzing sound. The road ahead led back to the canyon. Jenna didn't have time to slow down and crashed right into it. The vehicles had disappeared, together with an unfamiliar landscape. The girls were back in the desert again. Fortunately, none of them were hurt, physically. But Lisa was in a state of shock. She was saying again and again, "They weren't human!" The girls had to help her walk. An hour later, they were able to stop a Utah Highway Patrol car. They told the police their story. The details of the report compiled by the police officer were complicated and confusing. During the investigation, the police couldn't figure out from the tire tracks exactly where the car went astray. The tracks ended very abruptly, as if the Chevrolet had suddenly disappeared. The police couldn't explain how the car could have driven 2 miles without leaving any traces, especially on such solid ground. There are still disputes about this story, but in the end, all versions and explanations of what happened are just guesses. Perhaps we'll never find out the truth. These were the urban legends about interdimensional traveling. Of course, there's no proof that any of these stories are real. Often the truth turns out to be very mundane. For example, the famous man from Taured, who people also called a guest from another reality, turned out to be a simple fraudster named John Allen Kuchar Zegrus. But even so, these stories are still very interesting.
Aomori Prison, Japan, 1936. Yoshi Shiratori was walking back and forth inside his prison cell, contemplating how he was wrongly accused of a crime he didn't commit. He didn't deserve to live the rest of his days as a prisoner. He needed to escape this filthy, cruel, and cold place where he was being mistreated every single day. But how? Aomori Prison was not the easiest one to escape, so he needed to be clever and patient to be able to come up with a solid plan. Shiratori started by observing the guards' routines. He was aware that even one tiny mistake could bring an end to him, so he had to memorize their every move with great precision. After studying their schedules for months, he realized that there was a 15-minute gap in their patrol time from 5:30 a.m. to 5:45 a.m. This was it. He had found his escape window. But then there was the problem of how he was going to pick his cell's lock. Shiratori was not the one to give up in the face of one minor inconvenience. Prisoners were provided with bathing buckets when they were inside the bathhouse. To his surprise, Shiratori realized that these were wrapped with a metal support ring which he could use as a wire. So, one day, he smuggled one back into his cell and waited for his moment to freedom. When the clock struck 5:30 a.m. and the coast was finally clear, Shiratori made his move. His hands were shaking due to the cold as he tried to pick the lock, and the fear of getting caught did not help either. It took him a few minutes, but he was finally able to kick his cell door open and run to his freedom. At 5:45 a.m., guards returned and checked his cell. To them, everything looked normal. Shiratori was sound asleep in his bed. But of course, what they didn't realize was the fact that it was not actually him who was under the blanket. Before he left, Shiratori had placed pieces of floorboard onto his futon to trick the guards to buy himself more time. So, nobody suspected anything until the next morning. But by then, Shiratori was long gone. However, this was only the beginning of Shiratori's story, who would later be known as the legendary prison break magician. 3 days after his first escape, Shiratori got caught again while trying to steal supplies from a hospital. And just like that, he was back in prison. This time, he was sentenced to life for his escape attempt. He had no hopes to see his wife and daughter ever again. All those months of planning were for nothing. And on top of everything, in 1942, he got transferred to Akita prison, where the conditions were even harsher than before. The guards who had heard about his escape attempt were determined to make an example out of him. In addition to all the extreme manual labor he had to do, he was forced to sleep on the hard concrete floor during the severe winter cold. And when he wasn't working, he was placed into solitary confinement for extended periods of time to make sure he could never attempt anything funny. You see, this isolation cell was specially designed to keep escape artists from escaping. It was very small, had a very high ceiling, and smooth copper walls that would make it impossible to climb. In addition, there was no sunlight whatsoever. The only window in the cell was the small one located in the ceiling, and on top of everything, Shiratori was handcuffed and mistreated by the guards at all times. However, one of them, Kobayashi, took pity on him and was concerned for his well-being. That's why he checked up on him from time to time, which made his miserable life a bit more bearable inside this awful place. On the stormy night of June 15th, at around midnight, the guards peered into the solitary cell and couldn't believe their eyes. Shiratori was nowhere to be found, and all that was left were his handcuffs. But how did he do it? First of all, Shiratori knew all the tricks to get out of cuffs, so they simply didn't work on him. Once his hands were free, by pressing his palms and soles of his feet on the smooth copper walls, he climbed the unclimbable wall with ease. The ceiling window was sealed, but Shiratori noticed that the wooden framing around it started to rot. So, night after night, he climbed there when the guards weren't looking and loosened the framing bit by bit. He finally succeeded in breaking the rusted fittings. However, he waited until one stormy night so that when he was out, no one would be able to hear his footsteps on the roof. 3 months later, Shiratori knocked on the door of the person whom he thought to be his friend, Kobayashi. He wanted him to stand by his side as he fought against the corrupt prison system. Since he was the only guard who respected him, Shiratori felt like he could trust him to do the right thing. But this was a big mistake. When Shiratori went to the bathroom, Kobayashi wasted no time informing the authorities that he was there. So, Shiratori was arrested and sent back to prison for a third time. Since he became something of a legend at this point, the authorities wanted to make sure he could not escape for a third time. So, they sent him to the most notorious and high-security Abashiri prison. It was in the northern part of the country and got plenty of snow, so no prisoner dared escape it with their thin uniforms. At first, he was thrown into an open cell exposed to the extreme cold while still wearing his summer prison uniform, and the guards were awful to him. One time, he got so angry that he broke his handcuffs in front of them, but that just made things even worse. He got locked in a cell wearing heavy iron restraints fitted around his ankles and wrists, which required 2 hours to unlock by a blacksmith. Shiratori vowed to escape, but this time, it all seemed impossible. Yet again, he found a way. Every day when the guards delivered prisoners their meals, Shiratori would drip his miso soup on his iron shackles as well as the food slot on his cell door. This ever so slowly wore down the metal, and finally, he was able to slip out of the chains. The hole, however, was still too small to fit a person, so Shiratori dislocated his own shoulder to slip through the hatch. He was a free man once more, as well as the first man to ever escape Abashiri prison. He went into hiding for over a year, but was caught again after he had a fight with a farmer for stealing a tomato from his farm. Authorities were not going to leave anything to chance now, and they locked him up at the Sapporo prison. The only opening in his cell was smaller than his head, and there were guards standing in front of it 24 hours a day, So, you can imagine the shock they felt when they couldn't find Shiratori there one day. This time, Shiratori managed to escape by digging a tunnel right under his bed using a miso soup bowl. He was a free man for a year until one day an officer sat next to him on a park bench. He didn't realize his true identity, but Shiratori was so moved by his kind attitude that he decided to reveal himself. He was arrested once again, but this time, having reviewed his case, the court revoked the harsh conditions of his sentence and sent him to the more comfortable Fuchu prison in Tokyo, where he was released even earlier for good behavior. He was finally able to reunite with his daughter as a truly free man.
You wake up in your house and take out an umbrella. It's Saturday and it's cleaning time. You reach for the magical button and the dishes, furniture, walls, floors, and even your clothes in the closet get sparkling clean. You have the rest of the day to yourself, and so you lie on the dust-free couch with your favorite book. This sci-fi setting was everyday reality for Frances Gabe for decades. She didn't clean her house at all. She didn't hire anyone to do it, yet it remained perfectly cleaned. Frances was born in 1915 in Idaho. Her father, Frederick, was an architect and building contractor. The family had to move a lot for his job, and Frances attended 18 elementary schools. She said she was born a most unusual person, and everything moved much too slowly for her at school. The girl preferred the company of her dad and his coworkers. She watched them and learned their craft. Frances graduated from Girls Polytechnic High School in Portland at 16. Next year, she got married. By the late 1970s, she was divorced and a single mother of 2 kids. She always thought of housework as a thankless, unending job. One day, she noticed fig jam slithering down her wall. Frances got so mad, she decided to put an end to all of this for good. She brought out the garden hose, got rid of the jam, and started designing her own self-cleaning house. She spent more than a decade and thousands of dollars of her own savings transitioning her Oregon home into a giant floor-to-ceiling dishwasher. By 1984, it was all finished. Frances received an official U.S. patent for her self-cleaning building construction. It consisted of 68 separate devices that made all the cleaning fully automated. Every room had sprinklers in the ceiling. Frances would put on her raincoat, take out an umbrella, and press a button to activate the sprinklers. They'd spray soap and water in a circular motion. Then it was all rinsed. Warm air then went through the vents to dry it all. In less than an hour, the walls, floors, bathrooms, toilet, and bath were all crisp, clean, and dry. The floors were coated with many layers of marine varnish and ever so slightly tilted toward the walls. There were gutters at the edge of every room. Water from the sprinklers didn't go to waste. It drained out of the house into the doghouse to wash the dog along the way. Furniture that wasn't supposed to get rinsed was covered in clear acrylic cases made of resin. Books had waterproof jackets. Papers were sealed in a plastic box, and pictures on the walls, including the patent, had glass cases to keep them safe. Awnings covered the beds to keep linen dry. Frances also invented her own waterproof fabric for the upholstery. The cupboard would make dishes clean without any assistance needed. Clothes would be placed inside a cabinet on hangers, washed and dried, and then, still on hangers, pulled into the closet with chains. The electrical outlets were all safely covered, of course. There were no carpets or curtains, no dust collectors allowed. Sometimes, the pipes would burst and water would spray in all unwanted directions. But all in all, it was running smoothly for about 20 years. Frances was dreaming about more self-cleaning homes and even self-cleaning office buildings, hospitals, and villages around the world. Her idea was to help single moms and women fed up with cleaning, and also people who can't clean due to health issues. She was traveling the U.S. giving lectures on her invention and showing a model of her design. She was featured in newspapers and on TV, but the idea never took off. By 2002, she couldn't afford to run the house and renew her patents, so they expired. Frances gave tours of the house, so she had some money, but that wasn't enough. This and natural disasters like floods and earthquakes turned the once cleanest house into a cluttered construction. In 2009, the lady moved into a retirement home. The house was sold some years later to a new owner who now has to clean it himself. Many people mocked the idea, and the self-cleaning home revolution never happened. Still, architects and builders these days admit her idea was functional and worth bringing to life. In 1998, when computers were taking off and taking up all of your attention, someone came up with and patented a brilliant idea of a motivational candy dispenser. It would be equipped with an optical sensor attached to your screen. The sensor keeps an eye on all of your activities and rewards you with candy for sending a work email or finishing a long important paper. The more work tasks you perform, the more candy you get. A cyborg-like wrist pouch to carry pencils, phone, lip balm, and other little necessities on your wrist was patented in 2001. If you don't enjoy raking leaves in the fall, you'd probably love the unique solution described by its inventor as compatible with the natural body movement of a person. Leaf-gathering pants have zip-on flexible tubes attached to pant legs and a net fastened in between to gather leaves as you walk. You can easily remove the large piles you leave behind later. The greenhouse helmet was designed to bring nature to big city guys. You put on a self-enclosed anti-fog covered dome on your head with tiny plants on built-in shelves. When you exhale, the plants take care of all the bad elements and recharge you with the purest oxygen. The helmet would be equipped with an intercom system to let you communicate with people outside your dome. In case you have a pet, but don't have 24 hours in the day to give it all the non-stop physical attention it wants, the automatic pet petter is something you'd appreciate. It works for both cats and dogs with its mechanical hand and plays relaxing tunes to them. The gadget is activated when Spot or Jingles gets on a motion sensor platform. Pet ears can get in the wrong places, like a soup plate, and spread the food all over the place. Back in 1980, someone decided to take care of it and patented the lightweight, adjustable, and easy-to-use animal ear protectors. They were designed especially for pets, mostly dogs, with long ears to prevent any contact with food. They also suggested decorating the tubes on special occasions. An anti-eating face mask was invented around the same time for those who have to spend their days around food for professional reasons. Chefs, cooks, and other restaurant staff dealing with food can put it on and lock it with a little padlock. Breathing and talking are still possible, but it makes eating highly problematic. The most important thing is not to lose that key, or you'd have to go on an eternal diet. Sled pants were equipped with a seat to slide down hills, and leg and waist straps to keep them securely attached to the owner. They were configured to take the shape of the human body. To stop the sled once you reach your destination, you'd have to fold the lower part up and walk away, pretending you didn't just ride your own pants. The 1923 head exerciser was invented to give you better circulation. Two people would hold a metal plate between their teeth. The plates were held together by a spring. As the pair pulled each in their direction, they'd take part in a sort of tug-of-war for the head. Someone came up with a brilliant idea of a watch that would let you know how long you have left to live in years, months, and minutes. The life expectancy guess would be based on some statistical methods and personal health factors of the owner. The watch had a microprocessor for storing data and buttons and switches to reset that data. Pet display clothing would be the perfect choice for those who can't leave their master at home alone. It's a vest or a belt with many tubular passageways going all around the body of the owner. The whole construction is see-through. There are little chambers for feeding and to take the pet out. An automatic tip requester consisted of an artificial hand and a box for cash to wear on your wrist. When the money someone would drop down the connecting tube didn't seem enough, a no sale sign would pop up. Sea shoes invented in the 1960s made walking on water possible. They used duck-foot propellers and required some good sense of balance from the owner to stay afloat.
We're in England, in the village of Turville. It's 1871. Here, on one street, you can find a particular house. It's no different from the others, but many stay around it and wait for something. The house's doors open. Several adults come out of there. They look surprised and say that all the rumors turned out to be true. The woman goes out on the porch and asks a few more people to come in, and you're among them. You go inside, head into the room, and see an 11-year-old girl sleeping on the bed. She looks pale and thin. Despite loud people's conversations in the room, the girl doesn't wake up. Her mother says it's been 6 months since she fell asleep. You leave the room, and the next few people come in to see the sleeping girl with their own eyes. This is a story about the most prolonged sleep in history. The record belongs to a girl named Ellen Sadler, who slept for 9 years. She was born in the English village of Turville in the second half of the 19th century in a big family. Ellen was the 12th kid. Her parents weren't wealthy and worked hard to make ends meet. They taught their sons and daughters to help them from an early age, and Ellen was no exception. When she turned 11, she left home to work as a nanny in a nearby town. While away from her family and surrounded by strangers, Ellen began to feel bad. She had a headache, felt discomfort, and felt certain drowsiness. These symptoms became so severe that the girl couldn't work properly. She returned to the house in the village where her parents sent her to the hospital. The doctors didn't know how to help her because they couldn't diagnose her. They spent 18 weeks trying to cure the poor girl. As a result, still unwell, Ellen was discharged from the hospital. After returning home, she experienced severe headaches and drowsiness. Ellen Sadler felt worse and worse. And then, one day, she quietly lay down in her bed and fell asleep. Ellen woke up only after 9 years. All this time, the girl's mother took care of her. She fed her milk and tea. The sleeping girl was losing weight and strength. Soon, the whole village found out about Ellen. People started coming to her house to see an unusual phenomenon. They looked at her, tried to wake her up, and told their friends about her. The news about the sleeping girl spread throughout the country. Ellen had become a spectacle. People from all over England came to see a person who had been sleeping for several years. They called the house where Ellen's family lived Sleepy Cottage. Doctors and reporters came there. One journalist from the Daily Telegraph described that the girl's body was weak and too soft. Her feet were icy cold, and her lips were blue. The child's breathing was barely discernible. It seemed that life was slowly leaving this body. The girl's family took donations for the care of their daughter. Therefore, many people thought it was all a performance. For some reason, the mother didn't allow the doctor to stay with Ellen for a long time. Some said that her mother gave her sleeping pills every day to not let her wake up. And someone claimed that they had seen a conscious girl sitting by the window. Also, the girl's mother rejected the doctor's offer to conduct a medical examination in a London hospital. We're unlikely to find out the whole truth about her since there was no official diagnosis from doctors. It's possible the girl fell into a coma or suffered from another disease that was unknown to science in the 19th century. It could be a chronic sleep disorder in which a person experiences uncontrollable bouts of drowsiness. You can walk down the street and want to sleep so much that you fall to the ground. Ellen grew up in a large family and got used to hard work early. Perhaps severe fatigue and lack of sleep provoked narcolepsy. In any case, this story had a good ending. One day, Ellen Sadler woke up. She didn't remember what had happened and was very surprised when her family told her about the 9-year-long dream. The girl's growth slowed down a little and her eyesight worsened, but her health wasn't bad. Ellen got married and had 6 children. In 1911, at the age of about 50, she passed away. Let's see a completely opposite story about a person who set a record for the longest time without sleep. In January 1964, 17-year-old Randy Gardner, a high school student, claimed he stayed awake for several weeks. The experiment started in December and ended in January. At the end of that time, he felt pretty normal. This event was in the Guinness Book of Records and allowed scientists to learn a lot about the structure of the human brain. Randy wanted to do a science school project related to sleep. He had to stay awake as long as possible, and his friend had to make sure that he was always awake. In the beginning, everything went well. Randy's friend kept a diary where he recorded the slightest changes in the subject's body. Randy held on easily for the first 2 days. He was constantly on his feet and didn't come to bed. After 3 days, his cognitive and sensory abilities began to decline. On the 4th day, Randy felt sick. He walked around the house and sniffed citrus fruits. The smell of lemons and oranges helped him get rid of this bad condition. During the day, Randy played basketball and went bowling with friends. The nights were boring because the guys didn't know what to do. But still, Randy didn't go to bed. A week passed, and Randy showed excellent basketball results. His physical skills hadn't changed. His speech was clear and logical. By this moment, the news all over the country had been speaking about Randy and his experiment. He became a celebrity, and it also helped him stay awake. Scientists came to Randy. With the help of mathematical questions, they tested his intellectual abilities, and here he showed poor results. He was solving an example in mathematics, but then he forgot what was going on and what he was doing. Scientists scanned his brain and recorded its activity data. Then, on January 8, 1964 at 2 a.m., Randy broke the previous record time without sleep. He was awake for 264 hours. Scientists attached electrodes to his head when he fell asleep and observed brain activity. Randy woke up after a few hours of sleep to go to the toilet. Then he lay in bed and got up only after 14 hours. He went to school in a great mood. Everyone was shocked. It seemed that his brain-heavy experiment had no negative consequences. Randy continued to study as before, play basketball, and spend time with friends. Scientists studied brain research results and found that Randy's brain was catching a light sleep all this time. These are called microsleeps, and the curious thing is that the person who's experiencing it may not even notice that they're technically sleeping. Several years passed. Everyone already forgot about this record. Randy grew up. One day, a reporter remembered Randy's experiment and interviewed him. He admitted that the experiment hadn't passed without a trace. For many years, Randy experienced severe insomnia. It was driving him crazy. He spent a lot of time and effort to overcome this disease. Fortunately, he managed to adjust his sleep regime. Randy slept 6 hours a day, which was quite enough. Repeating this experiment is a bad idea. Even 2 days without sleep are a great stress for the body. For thousands of years, people have survived hunger and complex work conditions. Our heart is trained to experience high loads, and our body can survive difficult situations. But our body has never encountered a lack of sleep in the entire history of humanity. Evolution has not taught us to endure sleepless nights without consequences, which is why it's bad for our health.
Would you like to have a super memory? What if you could remember any piece of your life in great detail? For example, you're walking down the street with a friend, and you hear a song. You remember hearing a fragment of this song 10 years ago on TV during the winter holidays in the Alps. You remember every celebration of your birthday, every party in your life. Sounds cool, but is it so good to remember your whole life? Let's find out by the example of a real person. Meet Rebecca Sherrick from Brisbane, Australia, who remembers her whole life. Literally, all of it. All events are stored in her mind almost from birth, and she has immediate access to them. She remembers her parents put her in the driver's seat of a car for a photo just a few days after her birth. She remembers how the seat cover and steering wheel aroused her curiosity. Rebecca remembers how she started having her first dreams at 18 months old. She didn't distinguish dreams from reality and thought that she was really leaving home somewhere. That's why she always wanted her mom to be with her. She also remembers by heart a big book she read many years ago. She can easily remember how she lay in bed, looked at the surrounding toys, and how her mother approached her to feed her when she couldn't even talk and walk. She sees it so clearly as if it happened yesterday. She remembers not only visual images, but also smells and even feelings and sensations that she experienced during some moments in the past. For a long time, Rebecca lived confident that everyone in the world had such a memory. Then, in adolescence, she began to suspect something was wrong with her. She noticed that she was fixated on some things from the past much more than her surroundings. It seemed to her that she had a mental disorder, and she felt insecure for this reason. But she had no idea how special she was. She learned about her uniqueness at age 21, when her parents showed her a news report about people with a phenomenal memory. Rebecca was surprised that it was something special. She realized she was among the 60 people worldwide with highly superior autobiographical memory, or HSM. This is a neurological condition of the brain in which a person can quickly and effortlessly reproduce in memory any fragment from life in the past. These may be some social events or personal experiences, and all of them spring up in your memory as clearly as if you're watching a high-quality video recording. Scientists are still studying the HSM phenomenon. It was discovered at the beginning of this century, and there are few objects to study, only about 60 people. The lack of information and observation slows the research process. But doctors have already learned something. This is part of the brain that helps process memory. A person with an ordinary mind remembers bright moments from life very well. In a sense, the brain of people with HSM records all the moments as bright ones. That's why people have such easy access to them. It was important for Rebecca to get an official medical diagnosis because she wanted a clear answer to the question of what was wrong with her and to improve her self-esteem. To confirm the diagnosis, Rebecca had to go through a multi-year study. She did various analyses and passed multiple tests. Then, a couple of years later, Rebecca returned and told the scientists about what had happened 2 years ago. When her case became famous, she revealed the dark sides of her gift, which she also calls a curse. So, HSM seems like a cool superpower. But there's a bad side here. Do you know that moment when you're lying in bed and suddenly remember something embarrassing that happened to you a few years ago? For example, you disgraced yourself during a presentation, or couldn't find the right phrase in an argument, or behaved very stupidly on a date. So people with HSM have constant access to all these awkward moments. You can remember every last detail of every wrong moment in life. And of course, such thoughts are pretty challenging to control. Imagine how difficult it will be to fall asleep if you start remembering and reliving bad moments in life. It would be hard not to go crazy after years of such a life. And the problem is not even in the most minor visual details, but in the repeated reproduction of feelings and emotions. Someone said something hurtful to you, or you saw scary pictures on TV many years ago. All this can pop up in your memory many years later if you have HSM and return the same emotions to you. If Rebecca remembers a stressful case when she was 3 years old, then as an adult, she will experience this case as a 3-year-old girl. Such emotional swings contribute to the appearance of depression, anxiety, and stress. And the more negative emotions you accumulate, the harder it will be for you to fall asleep at night. That's why Rebecca takes great care in life. She understands that any unpleasant thing can remain in her memory forever. She takes medications to control the incoming information and goes to a therapist who helps her avoid bad situations. Imagine that you need to think ahead about every step in your life. Should I watch this movie or not? Go home the other way? Read this dude's Twitter thread. This makes you too cautious and severely restricts your life because you know these moments will stay with you forever. Perhaps you would avoid risks so as not to fail. And such a life reduces the chances of success in every way. Yeah, it's cool to have HSM if you were born into a wealthy family, travel a lot, have no health, mental, or social issues. Everything works out for you, and you're always happy. But let's be honest, almost no one has such a life. And even the rich and successful have problems. Some people with HSM say that their memories are well organized in the brain, like books on a bookshelf in alphabetical order. But Rebecca's memory is chaotic. Her brain is filled with worries. This often causes her insomnia and headaches. Perhaps this is because she also has a confirmed diagnosis of autism. But Rebecca's life didn't turn into a nightmare. Fortunately, she learned how to overcome bad memories with positive ones. If some bad moment begins to invite into her mind, she covers it with a happy piece from her life. And this is the most beautiful part of HSM. This feature in the brain helps you solve exams, learn something quickly, and remember all books and movies. But the coolest thing is the opportunity to experience happiness anew. Even if you're in a bad mood, you remember how much fun you had that day at the water park, and your brain enjoys this moment. This allows you to experience happiness every day, every minute. At the beginning of each month, Rebecca selects the best moments of this month in the past years. When she returns to them, it helps to fight bad memories. Another cool feature Rebecca has learned is the ability to turn any nightmare into a happy and beautiful dream. She can build and create whatever she wants during sleep, and she can remember all her dreams. Not all people with HSAM have this ability, but some also reported they had lucid dreams they could control. By the way, the only memory Rebecca doesn't have is her birthday. She doesn't know how she felt inside her mother's belly and says she wouldn't want to remember it. Today, Rebecca lives an ordinary life. She doesn't want big changes and likes to think and feel how she's used to it. She hopes that her case will help many people worldwide, so she participates in 2 scientific studies that can help treat certain brain diseases.
There are very snowy winters in Sweden, you know. Snow covers all roads and slows down the traffic. Some cars may pull over to the side of the road and get out only with the help of a tractor. This is a common thing. But one day, during a snowfall, something astonishing happened. On December 19, 2011, a man named Peter Skylberg found himself in a snow trap after he drove off the main road in the north of Sweden. Then snowmobilers accidentally found him, pulled him out of there, and took him to the hospital. It may seem like something common, but here's the kicker. It took 2 months to find him, and outside of that time, the temperature dropped to minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit. That man survived after spending 60 days without water, food, and heat sources among icy winds and endless snow. The people who found him said the car was buried deep in snow at 3 feet. And Peter Skylberg was sitting shaking inside a sleeping bag in the front seat. He couldn't speak. When they brought him to the hospital, the doctors were amazed. They knew cases when people survived in cold temperatures for a long time, but not for 2 months. A person can live without water for several days, but Peter had no problems with this since he extracted water from the snow. Without food, a person can survive for several weeks to 3 months. But what about the cold? How did Peter solve this problem? At such low temperatures, people can freeze within several hours. The doctors treating Peter claimed that his body seemed to activate survival mode and fell into a deep sleep. It's like bears that hibernate during winter. But the human body can only lower the temperature by a few degrees. This is not enough to survive in minus 22-degree frost. Maybe the man somehow managed to lower the temperature even more. The case of Peter Skylberg became famous. Doctors and scientists from all over the world put forward their hypotheses about how this man managed to survive. No one could give the exact reason. Many people claimed it was just a real miracle. Others believed it was the result of several factors combined together. One of these factors is the sleeping bag. It helps keep your body heat better so your temperature may not drop for a long time inside the bag. Another factor that probably played the key role was the igloo effect. Indigenous peoples living at the North Pole make their homes out of ice and snow. You've probably seen these round houses on the internet or in the movies. It's not warm inside them, but it doesn't let the cold in. The particular design of these houses helps keep the accumulated heat inside. Igloos can protect from strong winds, but it's possible to survive inside them only if you're wearing warm clothes. Perhaps Peter's car turned into such a house. Snow clung to it from all sides and blocked the heat inside. Many people wondered why he hadn't tried to get out and find help. But seems like Peter did the right thing. It's pretty dangerous to go out in such conditions. You don't know where you are, it's freezing cold, and there's a blizzard. Let's say you get out of the car and try to get to the nearest road. You fail and come back. But you can't find your car because the snow has covered it. Now your situation is even worse. The only option is to start digging snow and make an igloo. If you have warm clothes, an igloo will help you to keep warm and gain some time. But the right solution is to stay inside the car and wait for the rescuers, especially if you don't know where you are. If you don't have communication or signal lights, then try to make a fire. Smoke can attract the attention of people passing on the nearest road. Peter Skylberg spent some time in the hospital, regained strength, and was cured. Now, it's much safer to be in a closed cold room or an igloo during the cold. However, if you're stuck in a severe frost without warm clothes, you have about 30 minutes to 2 hours, maybe even less if you don't move. But in 1980, a miracle happened that shocked people and doctors all over the U.S. 19-year-old Jean Hilliard was driving home at night to the small town of Lengby. She lost control and ended up in a ditch. The girl decided to walk to her friend. She then saw her friend's house, but she didn't get there. She got too weak and fainted. Suddenly, Jean fell and lost consciousness near her friend's house. Jean Hilliard was wearing a light winter coat, cowboy boots, and pants, so she wasn't quite prepared for harsh winter conditions. There was a strong blizzard and snowfall outside, so no one noticed her. The friend Jean wanted to visit only saw the frozen girl near his porch in the morning. Jean Hilliard had been lying there for 6 hours. Her body was hard and cold, as if it were made of rubber. Her eyes looked as if they were made of glass. The man who noticed the girl was sure she wasn't alive. But then, he saw bubbles of moisture from her nose. The girl was breathing. He got the girl to the hospital. Her body wouldn't bend, so putting the girl in the car was problematic. The doctors immediately rushed to help Jean, but that wasn't easy. They couldn't even make any injections, as the needles would constantly break. The muscles were too stiff and frozen. Her body activated emergency mode and stopped supplying muscles and soft tissues with blood. All the red liquid was directed at the vital organs. Also, in emergency mode, our organism can slow down all internal processes of the body. The heart starts pounding slower, the lungs consume less oxygen, and the metabolism nearly stops. Such energy savings helped the girl to survive. But the doctors were more surprised that Jean didn't get any serious troubles. She got frostbite, but the ice crystals didn't destroy her skin and soft tissues. Doctors decided to warm the girl with a bunch of heating pads. Then they finally managed to inject medications. A few hours later, she regained consciousness. The test showed that Jean was in perfect health. Meanwhile, you can get into a severe trap not only in nature and bad weather. You can get stuck in an elevator in a building full of people in Manhattan, and no one will know about it. This happened in 1999 with Nicholas White. The 34-year-old manager was working late in the office and decided to take a break. After getting some fresh air outside, Nicholas called the elevator to go back to the 43rd floor. But he got trapped in the elevator. It was already quite late and almost all the workers had left the building. But the worst thing was that it was Friday night. Nicholas had no phone, no food, and no water. He pressed the emergency call button, but no one answered him. The cameras worked perfectly, but the guards didn't see him. The building was basically empty. Nicholas struggled with claustrophobia, walked from side to side, jumped, laid down, tried to open the doors, and waited for someone to rescue him. There were repair workers on the other floors, but they didn't hear Nicholas. Also, his colleagues stayed in the office where he worked. They were sure that Nicholas had just gone home. They left the office using other elevators and didn't notice that Nicholas had left his things on his desk. Well, Nicholas was in despair. He was rescued 41 hours later. He was lying on the elevator floor, tormented by thirst, when he suddenly heard a voice from the elevator speaker. "Hey, is anyone there?" Rescuers got the man out of the metal box, and the building owners paid him compensation for the inconvenience. Despite this nightmare, Nicholas continued to use the elevators. Yeah, living in Manhattan, it would be problematic to avoid them. Certainly for Nicholas, life has its ups and downs.
Hello, Brightsiders! I recently decided to propose to my girlfriend and I went to the jewelry shop. While choosing a ring, the seller told me stories about different stones, and one of them about why members of the royal family would never buy rubies was the most fascinating. Rumor has it that British monarchs see rubies as bad luck. But where would they get an idea like that, and why did the superstition start in the first place? Nobody knows, but many people put it down to Queen Victoria. The story goes that the 19th century monarch didn't like this gorgeous red gemstone. As you know, Victoria, the great-great-grandmother of Elizabeth II, was very influential, especially regarding fashion trends. And anything the queen of trendsetting did like almost instantly became mandatory. As proof, let's remember that white satin wedding dresses only became all the rage after Queen Victoria's marriage to Prince Albert in 1840. Before that, brides wore all sorts of colors. The only color considered bad luck was, get ready for this, white. Before Victoria changed the game, white was associated with misfortune. In some cultures, like in India, it still is. Since the queen could so quickly turn what was once bad luck into a wedding custom that would live for ages, it's natural to think she did the same thing, only in reverse, with rubies. After all, Victoria didn't wear them at her wedding. She wore sapphires and diamonds. But where did her distaste for rubies come from? Just personal preference? Or fear of an ancient curse? Let's look at the facts. Victoria's mother celebrated her daughter's wedding by giving her what's known as ruby parure. A parure is a set of jewels the royals wear together, like earrings and a necklace. As its name implies, it was brimming with rubies. Before handing it down, Victoria wore the coronet that was part of the set on many occasions. There is also a theory that her husband was the one with the ruby phobia and forbade the gemstones on their wedding day. But it turns out to be a myth because Victoria's engagement ring shaped like a serpent was made of tiny rubies, diamonds, and an emerald. So while Queen Victoria started plenty of traditions, the idea that rubies are bad luck isn't one of them. And have all the British royals avoided rubies? Because there has definitely been some bad luck associated with the red gemstone. The marriages that come after a ruby engagement don't seem to stand the test of time. Look at Princess Margaret, sister of Elizabeth II, and Sarah, Duchess of York, who had been married to the Queen's son Andrew. Both had ruby engagement rings, and marriages didn't last. Maybe you've heard that as soon as Mary of Teck received a ruby engagement ring, the groom-to-be succumbed to influenza? Well, don't jump on the superstition train just yet. There's no evidence that Mary ever received a ring of any kind from the engagement. Her mother, Princess Mary Adelaide, Queen Victoria's cousin, didn't get a ruby ring. The marriage didn't end, but it was pretty much a case of Mary settling for a suitor because she had no other options. Not exactly an epic love story. Or do you think the gem was at fault? And what about all those other unhappy brides with rubies on their fingers? If we're looking for examples of unlucky marriages in the British monarchy, the first person that comes to mind is Henry VIII. Of Henry's 6 wives, 2 may have donned rubies. Anne of Cleves wore what looked like an emerald and a ruby ring in the portrait that convinced Henry to marry her. Unfortunately, the real Anne proved less appealing, so Henry ordered their marriage annulled the following year. On the bright side, if you know anything about what happened to Henry's other wives, then it seems like the ruby ring was a lucky one for Anne. Well, the second wife to wear the ring, Catherine of Howard, wasn't so lucky. I guess this disproves the theory altogether. But think about this. Many of the rocks on those engagement rings come from crowns. Unsurprisingly, the royal family has all sorts of bejeweled headpieces. Dainty coronets, small tiaras, and the one with the world's largest uncut ruby, the Black Princess ruby. You might not have heard the name, but I'm sure you've seen it. Picture the king or queen of England and the big crown on their head, the one that looks like a puffy fur hat. It's known as the Imperial State Crown, and it's probably the reason why you drew crowns the way you did when you were a kid. You know, with the giant blob of red in the middle. Well, the blob is a ruby. Yeah, it's that big, about 2 inches long and weighing 170 carats. That's almost the weight of a golf ball, which wouldn't sound impressive if we weren't talking about the gemstone here. The famous and historic ruby isn't precisely a ruby, it's a spinel, but I won't get too technical here. It was named after Edward of Woodstock back in the 14th century, and he went by the nickname the Black Prince because of the black armor and the shield he wore. Edward got the ruby from another king, Don Pedro the Cruel, in exchange for helping him to deal with some unrest in his territory. But before Edward got a hold of it, the giant gem had its own mysterious and troublesome past. Some people believe that the ruby was cursed by the Prince of Granada, from who Don Pedro had taken it. There's no evidence that Don Pedro cursed the ruby again before giving it to Edward, but it's hard to imagine a guy nicknamed the Cruel parting very peacefully with a jewel that big. But did the Black Prince's ruby bring good luck or bad luck to the royals? I guess it depends on who you ask. Henry V wore a gem-encrusted helmet that included the Black Prince's ruby when fighting in France in 1415. One day, he got whacked in the head really hard. What's worse, he nearly lost his fancy helmet. Bad luck. Then again, he survived, and he kept the helmet and the ruby, so good luck. Richard III was supposedly wearing the Black Prince's ruby when he was in Bosworth Field fighting it out with Henry Tudor towards the end of the same century in 1485. All I'll say is, Richard wasn't so lucky. Yes, that points to the ruby being bad, but that's only a rumor. Maybe he wasn't wearing it at all. While you're thinking about that, consider this. That ruby now resides smack in the middle of one of history's most recognizable crowns. And as I said, a lot of royal engagement rings feature jewels that previously adorned crowns. Imagine what would happen if a would-be princess told her love-struck prince that she'd love to have, a big shiny ruby. I don't know, maybe the biggest one out there, the Black Prince's ruby. If you heard of Romeo and Juliet, you know it's not easy to dissuade young love. And when it comes to royal families who tend to marry royalty from other countries, such a denial could even start some major conflicts. Wouldn't it be better to avoid the whole thing by concocting a myth? Then the king could tell his love-struck son, I know she likes rubies and I'd love to give it to her, but did I tell you about the curse? Oh, it's terrible. If you love her and want her to be safe and happy, you must make sure she never wears this ruby. Or maybe the trends just changed over time. Rubies were out, diamonds were in, and that switch could have been done on purpose. We now see diamonds as the go-to engagement rock, but it wasn't always that way. Before 1940, only about 10% of brides-to-be received diamond engagement rings. What changed? Well, experts point to an ad campaign by a jeweler named De Beers Diamonds that linked these rocks with love, and it worked. But the more superstitious members of the royal family will swear by the evidence. If rubies mean short-lived marriage, then diamonds are forever. Like the 15-year marriage of Camilla and Charles, Sophie and Edward going strong for 20 years. Queen Elizabeth herself had a diamond engagement ring, and she and Prince Philip have been married for over 70 years. Maybe it's because of history or just trends. I'll let you decide why the British royal family has sworn off rubies.
Not many survival stories can rival the miracle that happened to Marine Lieutenant Colonel William Henry Rankin in 1959. See for yourself. One bad day, this man nearly drowned, falling from the sky. Are you saying that it sounds too paradoxical to be true? Then take a seat. I'll tell you a story. It was July 26, 1959, when Rankin was piloting his F-8 Crusader, a single-engine supersonic aircraft, along the North Carolina coast. It was a high-altitude flight, and Rankin, together with his wingman, Navy Lieutenant Herbert Nolan, were flying at the height of more than 47,000 feet. Their jets, nicknamed Candy Stripers because of their unusual orange and silver-gray coloring, were moving through the air smoothly and lightning fast. The only thing that could cause some trouble was a storm that was raging far beneath the plains. But now, it didn't present any threat. However, the pilots were supposed to pass through this storm on their way to the Marine Air Base in Beaufort, South Carolina. Things took a turn for the worse when the aircraft was approximately 9 miles and mere minutes away from the military base. Suddenly, Rankin's engine quit, and the fire warning light switched on. Unable to restart the engine that had lost all power, the man knew he didn't have many options. That's why, desperately trying to keep his plane from gaining speed and going into a complete nosedive, Rankin radioed his partner.
Engine failure? I have to eject.
It was a terrifying decision since the altitude was too extreme and the Marine didn't have a pressure suit. The only thing that could help him survive was an oxygen mask with a limited oxygen supply. In any case, the pilot didn't have a choice. Without hesitation, he pulled the overhead handle that triggered the ejection, and in no time, he was in the air, and his plane disappeared in the clouds below. Now Rankin was in a free fall at a height of 40,000 feet, with a temperature of minus 65 degrees F. Usually, sport skydivers make their jumps from a height of 3,500 to 10,000 feet. Only highly experienced experts jump from altitudes higher than 15,000 feet. Even then, it can lead to serious complications if they don't have all the necessary equipment, including a pressure suit, which, as you remember, Rankin didn't have. That means that when the man found himself in the air at such an unprecedented height, he experienced severe decompression. It felt as if his stomach had increased to twice its size, and his nose seemed like it was about to explode. His eyes, ears, and mouth started to bleed. For several blood-curdling moments, the Marine was sure that the decompression would finish him right away. Little did he know, he had a much more severe trial ahead. Rankin continued falling, and all he could feel besides all-encompassing fear was the shocking cold. His wrists and ankles were burning as if someone had put ice directly on his skin. He'd lost one of his gloves while leaving the plane, and his left hand felt completely numb, and to make matters even worse, he was still in free fall. Of course, the pilot had a parachute, but it was supposed to deploy automatically at an altitude of 10,000 feet, and even if Rankin had decided to open it, he simply wouldn't have been able to do this. That's why, in a matter of seconds and at a dizzying speed, the man hit the very storm he'd been piloting his plane over just minutes before. And that's when another calamity happened. Rankin had been falling through the black clouds with almost no visibility for about 5 minutes, surrounded by lightning, rain, hail, and violent winds, when something went wrong with the barometer that was supposed to deploy his parachute automatically. Fooled by the violent weather raging around the Marine, it triggered prematurely, and the man got stuck in the very middle of a thunderstorm. But it wasn't just any old thunderstorm. Nope. The unlucky 39-year-old fighter pilot plunged straight into a cumulonimbus cloud. These clouds, which often look like huge puffy mushrooms, are incredibly dense and tend to appear in areas where the atmosphere is extremely unstable. Also, such clouds are vertical, and the peaks of the most monstrous ones can reach the height of 70,000 feet. The taller the cumulonimbus cloud is, the more unstable and violent it is inside. That was the circumstance Rankin ended up in after his parachute opened too early. Conversely, even if his parachute had deployed at the supposed altitude of 10,000 feet, the man would still have been sucked back up into the cloud with the updraft. In any case, the pilot didn't have time to dwell on this. His body was tossed about as if he was nothing more than a rag doll. He would hit the fabric of his parachute, fall back down, and repeat this cycle again. The tossing was so bad that even the experienced fighter pilot felt seasick. Lightning snapped and crackled around Rankin, and even though he didn't hear the thunder per se, he could feel it vibrating through his body. The hailstones were so big that at some moments Rankin worried they would tear his parachute. The worst happened when the pilot was falling through the rain. For several terrifying moments, the man was sure that he would drown. He was trying to take a breath, but only breathed in mouthfuls of water. If he'd stayed in that region of the storm for any longer, drowning while falling through the air would have become a frighteningly real outcome. He tried to hold his breath, but it was a very dangerous thing to do while falling at breakneck speed. Meanwhile, Rankin was also blown up and down, sometimes as much as 5,000 feet at a time. It seemed to him like he'd been falling for ages, with blasts of compressed air hitting him the whole time. Fortunately, not only good things, but bad ones too, tend to come to an end. When Rankin finally reached the bottom of the cumulonimbus tower, he'd been inside for more than 40 agonizing minutes. The pilot was shocked to discover that he was relatively unscathed. The lightning hadn't grazed him, his parachute was in one piece, and he hadn't drowned in the rainwater. The only thing he had to worry about now was a safe landing. At first, Rankin was going down toward a clearing, but his bad luck continued, because at the last moment, a powerful gust of wind threw him into a tree. The parachute got tangled in the branches, and the pilot hit his head on the trunk. Luckily, he was still wearing his helmet and didn't lose consciousness. After freeing himself and staggering to his feet, the pilot limped through the forest until he found a country road. But hitching a ride turned out to be a tough task. Imagine a man standing on the side of the road, covered in blood and dressed in a soaked, ripped-up flight suit. No wonder there weren't many volunteers to give him a lift. But eventually, someone picked him up and drove to a payphone where Rankin managed to call for an ambulance. There, he found out what a lucky man he really was. He had countless bruises and welts scattered all over his body. He suffered from bad decompression effects, and he had frostbite. But other than that, the ordeal didn't leave any long-term damage. Rankin spent several weeks in the hospital and made a complete recovery. Later, he wrote the book, The Man Who Rode the Thunder, where he described his experience. If you know other incredible survival stories, let me know down in the comments. If you learned something new today, then give this video a like and share it with a friend. But hey, don't go bail out on me just yet. We have over 2,000 cool videos for you to check out. All you have to do is pick the left or right video, click on it, and enjoy. Stay on the bright side of life.
Her name is Lillian Boyer. Wait a minute, why is she standing on the wing of an airplane? Well, from 1921, Lillian made a living doing completely crazy mid-air stunts on planes. She really knew how to put on a good show, and she became famous all over the United States. But Lillian started her unusual career completely by accident. She was a regular 21-year-old waitress at a Chicago restaurant. That changed when two pilots named Elmer Partridge and Johnny Metzger became frequent customers there. One day, they offered Lillian a ride in their old biplane, a Curtiss JN-4D Jenny. She agreed, and they headed over to the local airport. Soon, Lillian was in the air. It was the first flight of her life, and she was incredibly excited. Flying didn't scare her at all. In fact, with a strong wind blowing in her face and the noise of the engine ringing in her ears, Lillian realized that planes were her calling. 4 days later, Partridge asked her if she wanted to take another flight. This time, Lillian decided to do something bold. When the plane was flying at 65 miles an hour, she got out of her seat and stood on the wing. But even then, she wanted more. So she walked all the way to the edge. The whole time, Partridge was screaming at her to sit down because he thought she was going to jump. She could barely hear his voice because of the engine noise. But Lillian wasn't scared at all. She actually enjoyed it. When the pilot saw what she could do, he introduced her to Billy Brock. He worked at the Chattanooga airport and was looking for someone who could do tricks on the wing of a plane. They shook hands and soon got started on Lillian's training. Lillian quit her restaurant job and started training full-time. For 5 months, she practiced doing stunts in a barn at Chattanooga. She used a model plane which had soft mattresses placed underneath it for safety. She did gymnastics with an instructor, as well as running and other sports, and she changed her eating habits. Soon, she was ready for a real flight. And she proved she was the best. Lillian was the first female stunt person to perform tricks like hanging from a plane using one hand or hanging by her knees or ankles. Her bravery amazed people, and she quickly became very popular. She and Brock started doing air shows at various fairs and festivals, and she turned into a real star. When they came to town, the crowd always recognized them. There was always a car waiting for Lillian, and she had a lot of passionate fans. Lillian was the only woman at the time who could perform one very risky stunt. She would get out of the cockpit holding a thin wire, which had a mouthpiece at the end of it. She would do a few tricks on the edge of the wing, and then hang under the plane holding on by only her teeth. The spectators couldn't see the wire from hundreds of feet below, so it looked both pretty shocking and amazing. The crowd would erupt into screams when Lillian performed this trick. Then Brock would lower a special ladder and she'd grab it and go back to her seat. But there were also accidents. These reminded Lillian and Brock that they were engaged in a very dangerous business and that they had to be as careful as possible. During one of their shows in 1924, they planned to do an unusual trick. Brock was going to do a loop while Lillian was standing on the biplane's top wings. The idea was for her to slip her feet into some straps, and the centrifugal force of the loop would help Lillian keep her balance. But during the actual trip, something went wrong and the strap broke. Lillian smashed really hard into the wing, but she still managed to climb back into her seat. She was injured, but she kept on doing her shows. When she was performing in Trenton, New Jersey, in October 1925, Lillian had another 3 accidents during some parachute jumps. On the first day of the show, the wind took her away from her landing spot and she fell onto the seat of a Ferris wheel. Some of the audience thought it was just another crazy stunt, but it was actually a very dangerous situation. Luckily, the Ferris wheel operator realized that Lillian was in trouble and stopped the ride. The second time, she couldn't control her chute and struck the roof of the grandstand. She hit it hard and got stuck there, and people had to look for a ladder to help Lillian down. On the third day of her show, Lillian's parachute almost landed on a tent, so she pulled on the shrouds as hard as she could to change direction. But this made the parachute turn inside out, and Lillian fell about 50 feet straight into the ground. She suffered a lot of injuries and had to be hospitalized, but she was treated very well. She was in the hospital for 2 months, and all of her bills were paid by an anonymous person. Lillian thought it was probably the president of the fair. He liked her. In fact, since she was a star, a lot of men admired her. But she didn't risk her life for money or fame. Lillian did all this for herself. Brock got almost all the money from their performances, and that was her decision. They usually perform for 2 or 3 days straight, or even a whole week. They were paid $1,000 to $1,200 for one performance, but Lillian only got $100. As she said herself, that was a decent amount of money, and it was enough for her. So Brock ran the business, maintained the plane, and hired mechanics and crew. But their show was called Lillian Boyer's Flying Circus, and there was a reason for that. Brock was in love with Lillian. Constantly working together made the two of them close. It didn't work out though. Lillian told him that there wouldn't be anything between them. But he still cared about her, and Lillian really appreciated him for that. She trusted her pilot with her life, and she admired his skill. In fact, she said he was the best pilot she ever knew. Before every flight, he double-checked all the systems, wires, and mechanisms. He would tell her where to go, and Lillian would listen to him. And it was Brock who came up with most of the tricks. There was total trust between them, and they worked as one. After Brock passed away, Lillian kept doing stunts with another pilot, but she couldn't trust him like she had trusted Brock. One of her signature tricks was switching from a car to a plane, but she never did it with the new pilot. During her stunt career between 1921 and 1928, Lillian performed 352 shows in 41 U.S. states and Canada. She performed 143 changes from a car to a plane and made 37 parachute jumps. But in 1928, low-altitude flying was banned, and so dangerous stunts performed on the wings of airplanes became history. Almost half a century later, Lillian once again became a celebrity at the San Diego Aerospace Museum. An entire section of it was devoted to her incredible achievements. Lillian was the guest of honor at all the events there. One evening, she was given one of the most pleasant surprises of her life. It was a flight on a Boeing PT-17 biplane. This time, now in her 80s, Lillian didn't walk on the wings or perform dangerous stunts. But when she landed, she admitted that she really wanted to. The pilot had told her not to get out of the cockpit. Plus, she couldn't trust him as much as she had trusted Brock.
It's 2018. You get up early in the morning to go ashore and catch some fish. You come to the spot you were yesterday, throw the hook into the sea, and wait. The float is twitching. You've caught some fish, but hey, hello? Why aren't you doing anything? Right now, you don't care about the fish. You're looking at something in the distance. You open your mouth in surprise since you see a huge ship stuck on a shoal. It wasn't here yesterday, so it got here at night. Okay, it'll probably sail away sooner or later. You fish for a few more hours. During this time, you observe the ship and notice no movement there. Is it empty? Boats and the Coastal Service are sailing from the shore to the vessel. You decide to check it out too. You get in your old boat and go there. The mist descends to the water, making the ship look creepy. The colossal vessel is rusty and empty. But where is the whole crew? And how did it get there? The Coast Guard comes on board. They search the hold, the cabins, and the upper deck. There's someone's stuff, some remnants of food supplies, notebooks, and clothes. Everything suggests the crew has disappeared for some reason. Fishers who noticed the vessel first didn't see anyone coming down from the board. No radio signals were sent to the port, and no one reported about the ship. It appeared here from nowhere. The only chance to get any information is to look at the number and name of the vessel. This is Sam Ratulangi, PB 1600. The Coast Guard checks the information, studies the data of all the country ships, and no way. One company built the boat in 2001 in Indonesia. People used it to transport heavy loads across the seas around Asia. The ship had been properly operating for 8 years. People were delivering industrial goods to different points in the region, but something went wrong. In 2009, Sam Ratulangi was sailing near the coast of Taiwan, and that's it. There were no further records about it. There were no reports in any port. Everyone thought it must have drowned, so no one had been looking for it for years. And then, 9 years later, it appears here, big and rusty, off the coast of Myanmar, without sailors, without fuel. An investigation starts. City services are trying to find out the names of all the sailors working on the ship and find clues that would lead to solving this mystery. They also hope the ship owner will appear soon. They find 2 tow ropes on board. This means that some other ship towed Sam Ratulangi to this place. Then they identify and find 13 crew members. These people say they wanted to reach the factory in Bangladesh to repair Sam Ratulangi. Another vessel helped tow the ship, but then 2 cables tore off, and a storm began. No one wanted to stay on board during such weather, so the crew members left it. No one knows what the ship has been doing for the last 9 years, and how it was possible without people on board. And here's another, much more mysterious ship story. On February 16, 2020, locals found a large cargo ship stuck on a rocky shore off the coast of an Irish village. The boat looked rusty, with holes in the hull and rotten parts. People hadn't seen this vessel the day before, so it appeared there at night. The last time people saw the Alta cargo ship was a few months earlier, thousands of miles off the coast of Ireland. That day, the Alta was sailing in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean. Another ship, the MS Protector, noticed it. MS Protector crew members tried to contact the ship, but received no response. The people on board realized that they were facing an empty vessel. And then, 5 months later, it appeared near the coast of Ireland. There are more questions than answers in this story, but we managed to find something out. In 2015, the Alta appeared and disappeared from the radar several times. Any ship has an internal tracking system, so people can track its route using satellites. But Alta crew members often disabled this system. Perhaps they were engaged in some illegal activity. Anyway, in 2017, the ship often sailed between the ports of Greek islands. Then, the tracking signal disappeared and appeared only 10 months later, off the coast of North Africa. During this time, the ship changed several flags. In September 2018, the Alta was southeast of Bermuda and headed for Haiti. Then, the crew started facing problems. First, the main engine failed right in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. The ship began to drift. Several days passed, but the crew members weren't able to repair it. They began to run out of food and water supplies. The situation got even worse when they found out that a hurricane was approaching the place. Fortunately, they managed to contact the U.S. Coast Guard. A helicopter flew to the Alta on October 2nd to bring them some supplies. There was enough food for several days. Then, a rescue boat sailed to the ship. It evacuated all the sailors and delivered them to Puerto Rico before the hurricane. The Alta had to drift alone in the ocean. After a while, another ship approached the Alta to tow it to the shores of Guyana. But at this moment, everything went wrong. Someone stole the boat, disabled the tracking system, and sailed away in an unknown direction. After almost a year, the MS Protector found the empty Alta in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean. And then, 9 months later, the ship without a crew sailed to the shores of Ireland. How did it manage to travel across the Atlantic and get to the coast of Ireland? It's still a mystery. Maybe it was just luck. No one else saw the ship all this time. It was just covering huge distances, surviving storms. Who's the captain? What happened to the thieves? Who owns the ship now? One day, someone called the village administration and introduced themselves as the vessel owner. But that unknown person didn't provide any evidence. They found several barrels of oil on the ship, which they took away by helicopter. The Alta was rusting. Corrosion of metal could damage the environment. The vessel had no commercial value, yet it would have taken millions to get rid of it. There were 3 options for what to do: leave the ship where it was, tow it into the sea and let it sink, or disassemble it for scrap. But nature had its own plans. Storms and strong waves split the hull into 2 parts. The Alta was drifting without a crew in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean for about 2 years. But this is nothing compared to a ship that was traveling for 38 years. The record belongs to the SS Bechimo. It was a merchant vessel owned by some trading company. In 1931, the ship found itself on the ice off the coast of Alaska. Its movement slowed down. A thick layer of ice blocked the ship, and a strong storm only made the situation worse. The blizzard was so intense that the crew members couldn't see anything but a white veil in front of their eyes. Sailing any further was impossible. The team had to wait for the storm to end. They waited for a day, 2, 3 days. A week had passed, but the snowstorm was only getting stronger. Then, one day, it grew weaker. The crew members split into 2 teams. The first team went to the nearest city. The second group, along with the captain, stayed on board. They set up camp next to the ship and waited for the blizzard, which had started again, to end. There was 0 visibility. And finally, one day, the storm was over. Great! And now, wait a minute. But where is the ship? The SS Bechimo just disappeared during the blizzard. The captain was sure that the ship had sunk, so he left along with the crew. Then, a week later, they saw the vessel drifting near the area where they had lost it. The hull was damaged so severely that it was unsafe to sail on it. Repairing the ship would be pointless and expensive, so the captain decided to abandon it. He was sure that it would go underwater sooner or later, but it stayed afloat for the next few days, the next few months, and a few years. People had reported seeing it at various points along the coast of Alaska for 38 years. The last record of the SS Bechimo is dated 1969. Those who saw it claimed the ship was completely frozen, almost merged with the ice. Some people planned to start an expedition to find the ship, but all attempts were unsuccessful. The vessel is probably lying somewhere on the deep sea floor.
That's it for today. So hey, if you pacified your curiosity, then give the video a like and share it with your friends. Or if you want more, just click on these videos and stay on the bright side.